Here we are again. The Leafs goaltending curse situation continues to strike. From the days of the Reimer and Bernier tandem to Frederik Andersen and then Jack Campbell, and now we have Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov, it just seems like there's a curse with this team as whenever they get a new goalie, something has to happen. Take Frederik Andersen as an example. He came off an impressive Western Conference run with the Ducks back in the 2014-15 season, came to Toronto 2 seasons later, and then fell apart for 4 more years. Then he goes to Carolina and becomes a Vezina favorite for half the season. It's just purely amazing to see how whenever these guys get in a Leafs uniform, they just fall apart. Either way, the Leafs goaltending situation continues where Ilya Samsonov and Matt Murray are the 1A and 1B. Samsonov has been great so far, and I'll be honest with you, I personally had doubts when the Leafs first signed him. I thought maybe he wasn't going to be able to lead the team considering his performance last year, which was an .896 save percentage and a .302 goals against average with Washington. So there was some reason to discuss why this may not work out, but looking at him right now and seeing what he's done so far with Toronto, I've been pretty amazed. He currently is 6-2 and has a .921 save percentage along with a 2.23 goals against average, which is just great. Matt Murray, on the other hand, has been, well, not so great. It's not very easy to tell right now considering he's only played one game in the season, which came against the Montreal Canadiens in that season opener, where the Habs scored with 16 seconds to go or something like near that. So obviously not the start that Murray had wanted. And now he has a groin injury and he was placed on long-term injury reserve, and we also have Samsonov injured with a knee injury. But taking this update from Mark Masters here, it says Ilya Samsonov, and then in parentheses it says knee, was on the ice today. Sheldon Keefe calls that a positive sign, calls him week to week. That's great for the Leafs because they need one of their goalies back ASAP. This team has had a really rough patch earlier this season, which they kind of cleared up with 3 straight wins as of now. But if Murray is out for a while, they have Samsonov coming back soon. Do they trust Eric Hallgren to take that backup role? There's already been a few goaltenders thrown out there for the Leafs to acquire in a trade, and knowing Dubas, he's willing to make a move as soon as possible and whenever possible if necessary. There's tons of decent veteran backups for the Leafs to have. They can pick Anton Khudobin, the guy who led Dallas to the finals in the bubble playoffs. They can take Jonas Carpasalo from Columbus, which is a team that is just struggling right now. They are miserable. Or maybe Anthony Stolarz from the Ducks. I mean, he's not really going to get a starting role because, John Gibson is pretty much just dominating there. But he's cheap, he's available, and he's going to be a free agent this summer. But the Leafs can maybe use him right now. There's just tons of options out there. But what if we stir the pot a little bit here and bring a former Leafs goalie back into the conversation? A very recent Toronto Maple Leafs goalie, honestly, into the picture. What if Jack Campbell were to come back to Toronto? Now, everyone settle down. Yes, we are getting to this point. Let's just all sit down and take a deep breath and listen. For all the Maple Leafs fans watching this, I'm almost certain how you just pretty much reacted right now. I'm pretty much sure. You're probably saying, well, we just let this guy walk in free agency, and now you want him back again. Well, maybe, but we know that the Oilers did not want to keep Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen as their 1A, 1B. They wanted some changes, so they signed Jack Campbell to that massive contract. But let me just start by saying, look, the Oilers aren't supposed to or should not certainly trade Jack Campbell right this second. It's way too early in the season to even decide this, and there's many other reasons why this would be a pretty bad idea. But with the start he's had in Edmonton, so far, there may be a reason to potentially trade him, even though he's played less than 20 games in a blue and orange jersey so far? I know this sounds crazy, but again, the rumor mill is always running, and sometimes we just see crazy things. We once saw that the Leafs were factoring Connor McDavid out of all people into their plans. There's a reason I didn't make a video about that because it's just absurd. It makes no sense, right? So there's definitely a lot of things in the rumor mill that you should not listen to. There are things you should listen to, and I personally thought that this was one of them. But this also sounds a bit unrealistic as Toronto had other plans that did not include him, so why would they want him back on a larger contract? However, we could see maybe other teams being interested in Campbell, but let's just focus on the Leafs here for a second. The reasoning behind this discussion is not necessarily because of Campbell's play. There are several factors playing into it, like the Leafs' desperate need for goaltending, Stuart Skinner on the rise, etc., etc. So let's just kind of delve into it a bit more. First things first, I want to jump to a subtle conclusion. I firmly believe that the Matt Murray experiment in Toronto is going to end up in a pure disaster. We have to admit that this guy is no longer the dude he once was back in 2015, 2016 when he won those 2 cups with Pittsburgh. He is not that type of player anymore. He's also extremely injury prone as he hasn't even been cleared from his concussion last year with Ottawa, and that's gotta hurt any team who wants him as a starting goaltender. And for a team like the Leafs who struggle with goalies, it's just gonna hurt them even more. So if Matt Murray is really not the solution for the 1B spot, Is it maybe time to put Campbell back into the course of action? I personally would rather have Jack Campbell as the 1B than Matt Murray, but there is an issue. He's obviously disgruntled with his performance in Edmonton in a very similar way he was pissed off about his performance in Toronto. And when you think about it, these two teams are very similar. These are two teams with high offensive power. You know, we have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl versus Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner with a somewhat similar defense for both teams, and we're seeing him have the same sort of performance. This could be bad for Toronto if they were to get Campbell because he's already in a slump and their cap space is basically maxed out, so there are many people who would disagree with this move. And similarly, there are reasons why the Oilers should not just give up on Campbell yet. I know that he's been bad. He himself is disappointed with his performance as he called it pathetic, and he thinks he's letting his own teammates down, which in this case can be a bit, debatable, but there's some things we need to lay out. First of all, it's notoriously known that Jack Campbell is a guy who starts slow. Pretty much based on last year, we can make this assumption. He started out with a record below 500. Last year, he started at 2-4, but then climbed back to win 3 straight games nearly 4 different times. The year before that, which was the 2020-21 season, Campbell won his first 11 starts. He literally won each of the 11 games he first played. And so that's kind of an outlier, but besides that, he's consistently been in the slow start category amongst goaltenders. But then as we saw last year, he starts picking up the pace a bit, and he becomes an ultimately god-tier goaltender. And then he kind of goes back down towards the end of the year, so in essence, he's a roller coaster. What's good now is that he's in a different scenery. He's no longer in that, grinding hockey market of Toronto where they're just super, super focused on winning right now because they need to get past that first round. That's been their struggle for the longest time. And if you play bad, the fans are going to jump on you. That's basically how the Toronto market works. And now he's in Edmonton, which is still a huge hockey city, don't get me wrong. But he's getting used to his surroundings with a different area. He's no longer in Toronto, which is all good. Maybe things just change and he just turns his career around with Edmonton. Who really knows? There's a lot of positives to take away from him coming here. Despite him being extremely inconsistent, Campbell was no doubt a top 7 goaltender when he's at his best. Maybe even top 5, but the goalie competition was just stacked last year. I mean, you had Shesterkin, you had Saros, you had Sorokin, you had Vasilevsky, the Markstrom, the list goes on and on, right? So, but, he's still an amazing goaltender when he plays well. That's my point. And Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith could never deliver when needed to, while Campbell has helped Toronto push Tampa, the future East champions, to 7 exhausting and mentally draining games. What a series that was. Nobody gave Campbell enough credit versus Montreal, versus Tampa, nothing. I feel personally that he played really well and made it a series that would be reminiscent for the ages. I mean, despite the fact that the Leafs lost both of those series, you cannot blame Campbell for either one of them. He gave us all. It's just that the Leafs skaters were not kind of in the same way. I felt personally that he played really well and made it a series that was worth watching and would be reminiscent for the ages. But hey, if Edmonton says, yeah, I really don't like Campbell and we see Ken Holland moving him out, that would say a lot about his character, and within his character, patience. Is Ken Holland a guy who's impatient and doesn't give second chances or let things play out? Kind of hard to say when he signed Evander Kane at his worst moments, right? So maybe after all he does give second chances and maybe he does have patience, but there's only so little we've seen. If you're Ken Holland, there's such little you know to even tell if you made a mistake trading a guy like Campbell. Another thing I've heard people say is that there's been no help for Campbell defensively. This isn't any excuse to maybe let Campbell get scot-free of his recent performances, especially that worsening save percentage, but it is fair to say that his decline is not entirely on him. Personally, if I'm Edmonton, I want to play things out safely. I wouldn't just trade Campbell so early on in the season knowing what he can do mid-year and hopefully towards the end. I would play things out knowing that the best of soup is yet to come, and think about it, they already have McDavid and Draisaitl. If Campbell is good too, then they already can keep that same A-plus offense, they already have a pretty decent defense. I would play things out knowing that the best of soup is yet to come, and just think about it, they already have McDavid and Draisaitl. If Campbell is good too, then they have the same A-plus offense they had last year. They have a much improved goaltender. I mean, would you rather take Jack Campbell in midseason form over Mike Smith? Hell yeah, why not? They could really make a good run for the Stanley Cup this year. Speaking of the Oilers making a good run for the Stanley Cup, go check out that video as well. But then, if we really do consider a return to Toronto, there's going to be a lot of discussions. First of all, do they put him in front of Calgren? If Samsonov's injury gets worse than what we already know, is Campbell going to have to battle with Calgren for that top spot? Let's face it, Toronto is in a bad spot regardless if they get Campbell or not. If they get Campbell, they have to take on that hideous contract, which will make all the small portion of fans who wanted Campbell to start saying, see, I told you, you should have let him stay. Now we're paying more for the same guy. But on the other hand, if they don't get Campbell, well, then they have Calgren and newly signed goaltender Keith Petruzzelli from the Marlies, so that does pose some risk on their probability to continue winning games. The Atlanta division is not an easy one to win, guys. It seems like every team but Montreal and Ottawa have a really good chance of making the playoffs as of right now, and if the Leafs go on another long slump, well, that could definitely hit them hard in the future. Not to mention that Ilya Samsonov may not come back to form immediately after injury, and Matt Murray is, well, a giant question mark at this point in time. Honestly, don't know what to really say about Murray. He's played one game and it wasn't a very good one, so his future is pretty much just up in the air. If the Leafs really do want to make a move for Campbell, then they will certainly need to move out some pieces to fit within that very tight salary cap. This means that they will probably be sending out one or two players who they're fine with getting rid of. Again, this all happens if Dubas is desperate for Campbell and Campbell only. There's no chance that they try and get Stuart Skinner. I mean, he is off the table as the stakes would be much, much higher, but there is somewhat of an upside to this. Let's just all say that the Leafs are better. They can definitely be better in goal with Campbell, considering he's familiar with the Toronto system. Maybe if Dubas says, you know what, I was wrong about letting him go, let's give him a second chance, they should all go in for it. But again, with every pro, there is a certain con, and that is the contract. That is the main con right now. It's the 5-year contract. If Dubas trades for Campbell, he must be sure that this trade works out fine. He's almost in the hot seat after not being able to get Toronto past round 1, and now if he wants Campbell, he better be happy with him being here for 5 years. If not, then there should be zero talks about this topic ever again. This is already a massive overpay, so Campbell must do his due diligence to bring his game back. Another thing we should keep in mind is that this Calgren-Petruzzelli tandem is not going to last very long. We already have Samsonov getting an MRI and back on the ice very soon, and Sheldon Keefe is saying that Matt Murray will be back on the ice in a matter of days, apparently, so that could certainly change the plan of action. But once again, this is a rumor that I'm not too keen on actually happening, because there's not only just tons of risk involved in it, but it's also going to be just days before we see the original tandem come back together, and this trade will not happen if that's true. But there's just so many different questions as to whether we see this really working, even if it does come into the picture. Is Campbell willing to come back to Toronto if Dubas calls up Ken Holland and asks for a Campbell trade? Is he still bitter about how the Leafs didn't offer him a contract despite him giving 100% effort with the team? He has a 10-team no-trade list, and are the Leafs potentially on that? If the answer is no to the first one, well, then this conversation just ends here. But if the answer is yes to the first question and no to the rest, then it gets very interesting. Let's just say, yeah, Campbell is maybe thinking that a reunion would be nice, and we have Toronto desperately trying to have him again. What would a trade look like? I'd give a few names right now, but it's going to be tricky considering they're just plagued with injuries at the moment. There's no Jake Muzzin, there's no Jordy Ben. I would doubt that Toronto gives up a defenseman unless it's Justin Hall, but I don't think Edmonton will take that. I mean, he's just not an upgrade in any way. Maybe a depth forward gets put in there like Alex Kerfoot or David Camp. I would hate to see Camp go. I mean, that's just risky, but hey, it can maybe happen if they want Campbell. Their best bet would be to trade a pick and a struggling depth forward, but no matter who Toronto gives up, I still think that Edmonton wins this trade. They already have an up-and-coming Stuart Skinner. They already have that potent offense, McDavid, Draisaitl. If they add Alex Kerfoot to the depth they already have, and guys like, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, a former teammate in Zach Hyman, they're going to be really, really good. They could definitely utilize a guy like Kerfoot on that penalty kill, which has not been that great overall as of recently. Look, I'm not a huge fan of moving Campbell out for the Oilers. In the Leafs' point of view, you let go of a guy who wasn't consistent, a good goalie in Samsonov, and now that you have both starters out for minimal time, you decide to trade for that same goalie for now a bigger price. You give up a forward maybe, and you take on salary. That's just definitely not something I would do if I was Dubas. But for the Oilers, you not only give Stuart Skinner that spotlight, but you also get cap relief to maybe make some trades down the line. It sounds pretty good, but what if Campbell becomes a monster later in the year and you're stuck with Mikko Koskinen as your backup? It's pretty bad either way, so this was an interesting rumor, but it really all depends on how desperate is Dubas. Let me know in the comments if you guys think this would work. If not, tell me why. Otherwise, thank you guys for tuning in, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah.